So in nature, fungi and bacteria are trying to kill each other. So they make all of these chemicals that are called mycotics or antibiotics, depending on what they are trying to kill. But these antibiotics are very specific for treating bacterial infections only. People who are selling meat, poultry, dairy products. So antibiotics are used to increase the weight of these animals so that they put on weight. And how do they put on weight? Can you give me some antibiotic because I have body ache? So I turned to him and I said that, you don't take antibiotics for body ache. They don't realize that, oh, my vitamin deficiency could have come from that antibiotic that I have taken. Oh, my mineral deficiency could have come from destroying my gut microbiome from that using that antibiotic. So when we are destroying the gut microbiome, we are making sure that the immune system training and updation is not going to happen. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this yet another exciting episode of the Microbiome Superhero podcast. So, we have looked at the neurotransmitter series. We are taking on something completely new today. Have you ever had a very nasty infection? And I'm sure you have taken antibiotics for that. So, what if I told you the same antibiotics, these miracles that have been saving you for all this while from infections, might actually be causing a lot of other health issues? How is that? Let's find out. So, let us welcome our co-host Sujata Gokhale. Welcome,
Hi,
Sujata.
Rashmi. How are you?
Good. I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. So, dear viewers, we are back with you with another mind blowing episode today where we dive into a fascinating world of microbes. And these microbes are none other but a superhero which save lives that you have commonly taken antibiotics. But there's a dark side to it as well. And we'll just about discuss all that in this podcast. So, stay tuned. Just a reminder before we embark on our new journey, if you're new to this podcast series, or if you just want to revisit all our podcasts, just click on below and you'll find the link to all our exciting episodes on the neurotransmitters that have happened before. So, now getting back to this, the early 20th century, where even deadly cuts were, cuts were even considered deadly. People could survive a cut or not a cut. I mean, it was all left to, what it was unpredictable. Nobody knew what could happen. And why was it? Because there was something that was missing in their lives. Now, people lived constantly in that fear of these invisible invaders, the bacteria that could infect their wounds and, lead them to something like septomania or something like that, which could actually result in loss of lives. And this was also the time of some of our world wars, which actually cost a lot of lives. So, as the story goes, one summer day in 1928, a Scottish bacteriologist, Dr. Alexander Fleming, he was on duty at St. Mary's Hospital, and he returned from a summer vacation to find a lab which was messy. Mind you, I guess many of the scientists who are tuned into this podcast will identify themselves with that kind of a lab. So, anyways, this was a messy lab bench, and he found something totally unexpected there. He examined colonies which he was growing of the specific bacteria strain called as the Staphylococcus aureus, and he was growing them on the petri dish, and he found that these had been contaminated. He examined colonies which he was growing of the specific bacteria strain called as this. He placed them under the microscope, and he was amazed to see something that totally revolutionized science and medicine. So, Rashmi, can you tell me, as a microbiologist, what happened
Yes.
there?
So this story is actually very exciting. That's the beginning of what we know today as antibiotics. And if we go back to 1928, as you said, World War Two, one, sorry, if we look at World War One, 18% of the deaths were due to bacterial infections, due to sepsis, and not because of the war itself, not because of the injuries. But what happened in 1928, just because before World War Two, is that Dr. Alexander Fleming came back to his lab from his vacation, And he remembered that he had in this messy lab he saw a petri plate which had colonies of this deadly pathogen called staphylococcus aureus. So that was the one that caused infections, that caused deaths in the previous war. It was one of the pathogens. And interestingly, what he saw is after his vacation he saw there was mold or fungus growing on that plate. And wherever that fungus was, around that fungus the bacterial colonies were gone. I mean, they were dead. Staphylococcus aureus was dying because of this fungus. So he thought it was very interesting. He was about to discard his plate, but then he tried that experiment again. He grew Staphylococcus aureus and he inoculated that same mold from this petri dish. And he found that the mold was actually releasing something, he realized later, that was causing death of this Staph aureus. So then it led to the discovery of this antibiotic called penicillin, because the mold itself was called Penicillium notatum. And then he did not know how to use that for treating anything because it is extremely difficult to purify this. He was not a chemist, he was a bacteriologist. It took another group of scientists, so Flory and Chen. They actually isolated this penicillin, they purified it chemically, they used it, but it took a good number of years. So it was only in 1941 that they were able to use it in proportions where it could be used on a mass scale. So interestingly, there's another story where a lab assistant of these, actually Mary Hunt, she brought a cantaloupe to the lab, and that cantaloupe had a growth of a very beautiful golden fungus. And this fungus again was a relative of this Penicillium chrysogenum, and that yielded 200 times more antibiotic than this. So in nature, fungi and bacteria are trying to kill each other, so they make all of these chemicals that are called, mycotics or antibiotics, depending on what they are trying to kill. So scientists have used, from that time onwards, antibiotics were developed. There were thousands of other antibiotics developed, and now we take them very routinely for all kinds of infections. So during World War I, we saw that there were 18% deaths due to sepsis or bacterial infections. But in World War II, because penicillin was available, the number of deaths came down to less than 1% because they were saved by antibiotics. And now everybody is taking it since then. They have been commercially produced all over the world. But as you said, there's a huge downside to that.
So isn't it fascinating what Dr. Fleming did? And he himself was very amazed and surprised. And he said, and I quote, "When I woke up just after dawn on September 28, 1928, I certainly didn't plan to revolutionize all medicine by discovering the world's first antibiotic or bacteria killer. But I guess that's exactly what I did." So scientists went on to take that theory forward, and they have, like you mentioned, Dr. Rashmi, discovered innumerable vaccines and innumerable antibiotics, I'm sorry, to actually overcome all these bacterial infections which were deadly. So, so Rashmi, can you tell us, are all bacteria bad? I mean, do we have to kill them all, or do the antibiotics that we are prescribed, they only kill the bad ones and leave the good ones aside if we have the good ones? So I need you
Yeah, so
to
this is a
answer
very
that.
important question because, when we talk about antibiotics, let us understand what they are first. Antibiotics is a term that is used for chemicals that come from natural sources, but now they have been made synthetically for the past several decades. But these antibiotics are very specific for treating bacterial infections only. There are antifungals that treat infections for fungi. There are antivirals that treat infections for that are viral. There are antiprotozoals. So there are different kinds of infections, and there are specific drugs or medicines for that. So when we talk about antibiotics, we are only talking about the compounds or the medicines that are used to treat bacterial infections. So most people don't know that there are different types of germs in our body, or different types of germs that are causing infections. And when we take medications to treat or some kind of an infection, we have to be sure that it is bacterial. If it's a viral infection and we take antibiotics for it, it is not going to cure that disease. It's very common sense because they are very, very specific. Even when we talk about antibiotics, there are narrow range antibiotics that kill particular types of bacteria. Then there are general broad spectrum antibiotics that kill a wide range of bacteria. So some doctors prescribe specific antibiotics, some prescribe a more broad range because they are not sure about what the infection might be. So what happens is, coming back to the microbiome. Now, when we say that we have this invisible organ called the microbiome in our body, do you know that more than 90%, about 95 to even 99% of our germs in our body are actually bacteria, and they are of all kinds. They are there to help us perform functions of this wonderful invisible organ that we call our microbiome. And we have it everywhere. We have the gut microbiome, the skin microbiome, the oral microbiome, the lung microbiome. So it's there in most organs, and they are performing very, very important functions. So just imagine that we are dropping this bomb of an antibiotic in the body, and now 99% or 95% of the population in our body of this invisible organ is also bacteria. What do you think will happen to it? Is it only going to kill the infection causing bacterium, or is it going to kill a lot in our microbiome? So unfortunately, when we do this, people think that bacteria are bad, but less than 1% of bacteria are actually harmful. More than 99% are helping us all the time. So when we go out to kill that particular thing by using an antibiotic, it is very, very damaging for the gut microbiome, for the skin microbiome, for all of the microbiomes in our body. So that is the first basic thing that happens, and it triggers a cascade of disastrous events later on. But just try
Yes,
to think
Rashmi.
that, there's a city in which, I always give this example, there's a city, or even a country where there's just one criminal maybe, and then instead of trying to figure out who that criminal might be or where that criminal might be, somebody decides to drop a bomb on that city. That, okay, let's just get rid of this, whatever the criminal is. So it will destroy the criminal, but it will also destroy the residents of that city, or wherever that bomb is dropped on. This is exactly what we are doing when we are taking antibiotics.
Yes, Rashmi, and like we have talked in our previous podcast as well, we have talked about the importance of the various good bacteria or the microbes in our body, which help do us a lot of other things. Developing whether it's developing our immunity, our neurotransmitter session. I mean, episodes talked about the various effects the good bacteria have on our gut. I mean, the advantages are innumerable. So what are we actually doing by getting rid of them? So it's really clear that now in the process of killing the bad bacteria, we're often ending up destroying the good bacteria and the essential ones. Some of them actually even produce the vitamins, help produce the vitamins our bodies need. So are we doing good by destroying them? So, Rashmi, we often get prescribed these antibiotics are often prescribed by the doctor. But I had talked to you, and you talked to me about an interesting case where these antibiotics were available just for the patient. I mean, without him actually knowing the background of it. So, can you just let us know what happened there and how you
Yes,
realized
yes.
that
So
things were not
I'll
right
just
there?
it was very recent that I was at a pharmacy for buying something that was prescribed. I went and I was just standing at the counter. So there was a guy who was standing next to me. He just came to the pharmacist and asked the pharmacist to give him an antibiotic because he had body ache. I was really shocked that he said, "Oh, can you give me some antibiotic because I have body ache?" So I turned to him and I said that, you don't take antibiotics for body ache. You actually take them only if you have a bacterial infection when the doctor prescribes it, not by yourself, because you're not going to know whether it's an infection, whether it's an allergy, whether it's something else. There are so many things that can happen. Even if you have a cough and a cold, it can be a viral infection, it can be an allergy, anything. So you either wait for the doctor to prescribe you antihistamines, or you take some natural things, like whatever we say that, the cardas to improve immunity. There are many things that we can take at home. But instead, this guy was casually walking in and asking for an antibiotic, and the the pharmacist would have given it to him, because in many countries, unfortunately, they are available over the counter. So are other deadly types of medication which should not be given over the counter at all. So these regulations do not exist. And even if they exist, what happens is many people get antibiotics prescribed by their doctor for something else. They don't take it at that time, they don't complete the dose, and then they take it whenever they think that they have a need to take that antibiotic. So what happens because of that, that they don't think that it is important to complete the course. They don't think that it is important to see what the actual problem is. And then it ends up killing a lot of other things, other kinds of bacteria that are naturally present in the microbiome, in the gut microbiome, especially because that bomb is being dropped in the gut directly. And also it is impacting the other microbiomes. So what happens here is, when you have your gut microbiome being responsible for helping digestion, helping you with digestion of your food, with making different vitamins, with absorbing many minerals, with doing so many other things, and then you remove a part of those bacteria or a large population of those bacteria by using an antibiotic, you are not going to be able to make vitamins, you are not going to be able to digest the fiber from your food, you are not going to be able to absorb the minerals from your food, you are not going to be able to regulate your insulin properly. There are thousands of functions that we can describe. And then when people start getting other kinds of symptoms after taking these antibiotics, they don't realize that vitamin deficiency could have come from that antibiotic that I have taken. Oh, my mineral deficiency could have come from destroying my gut microbiome from that using that antibiotic. So this is something that they absolutely don't realize. And you know what happens, we have discussed this before, that when the gut microbiome is destroyed, when we do not have enough diversity of these wonderful bacteria, especially because they make up more than 90% of it, what happens to our overall health? Our cells are not going to get what they need. This is going to lead to a lot of chronic diseases like the ones we see: type 2 diabetes, hypertension, fatty liver. There are many, many other chronic diseases, all of the chronic diseases that we can think of. We have talked about it in the neurotransmitter series and the previous ones, even many forms of cancers, because our cells are starving for nutrition.
When
So
you
this is a
discuss
very big reason why antibiotics should not be taken without prescription, without knowing it's a bacterial infection, and the very specific antibiotic should be used for the kind of bacterial infection that people have.
Yes, very interesting there, Dr. Rashmi. Remember, we had a conversation with a gastroenterologist, and he talked about his
Yes.
journey. Quite experienced gastroenterologist, and he's talked about his initial days experiences when they used to give the patient before any surgery a lot of antibiotics, and then they found that the recovery curve was very slow as compared to giving a lesser amount of antibiotics, and then they found that the gut flora was not disturbed to that extent, and slowly the recovery could take place faster. So it is an interesting and researched and scientific backed information that so much of antibiotics can actually destroy the gut flora and cause a lot of other fallouts in terms of disease or in terms of health issues. Rashmi, there is also one other aspect that you remember we discussed is about the multi-drug resistance. Remember
Yes,
that?
before we come to that, just one small point I want to add here. Another very important thing that happens when people take antibiotics indiscriminately is that when our immune system, as I said, 70% of our immune system is in the gut. So when we are destroying the gut microbiome, we are making sure that the immune system training and updation is not going to happen. So when the immune system is not updated, the next time it is a lot easier for infections to set in. For that person becomes even more susceptible to infections when he or she takes an antibiotic, because it also destroys immune system training for a long period of time until the microbiome actually recovers. So that is a very significant side effect that people don't consider. Yes, you are using this weapon, but you are not going to be able to use it. You will have to keep using it all the time, and it is going to cause a lot of chronic diseases. It will leave you susceptible to even more infections. So think about it. So as you
And
said,
also,
the other point about drug resistance. Now antibiotics are not just used for treating infections. We are seeing so many incidences of drug resistance. I remember reading about a case several years ago about a girl who was ziplining across a river in the US somewhere. She happened, the zip line broke and she happened to fall in a river. So her foot was infected by some microorganism. She got some infection from just falling in that river and getting that injury. So while it did not seem like a big deal at that time, that turned out to be a drug resistant pathogen, and it was a nightmare trying to get rid of it. So that was one of the first times I read of it. That this was many many years ago, and then this kept happening. This kept on happening, that we read about so many different cases of multi drug resistant organisms. Where are they coming from? When we use antibiotics indiscriminately, what happens is that there is something called antibiotic resistance genes that naturally occur in bacteria, because they are also trying to defend themselves from these fungi that are trying to kill them in nature. Because this is not something that somebody came up with. Antibiotics are actually present in nature. So bacteria naturally have antibiotic resistance genes. When people take antibiotics, what happens is, in their body, if there are any bacteria that have antibiotic resistance genes, they are the ones that will not get killed. And guess what happens? They get enriched. Because you are taking that same antibiotic and killing everybody else, the bacteria that are strong at that time are going to grow even more, and it keeps happening. So when you have this happening with different kinds of antibiotics over a person's lifetime, people develop antibiotic resistance, because they have all of these bacteria that have the superpowers to resist being killed by these antibiotics. Even when people don't complete the course of the antibiotics, by the way, that can also happen. And antibiotics are not just coming from the treatment or the medications that we are taking. They are coming from a lot of other sources.
So yes, Rashmi, they are coming from a lot of other resources, and I think since we know that bacteria are not only existing in our gut, it's also existing in the soil. It is also existing in other food that we give to the animals. I would like you to highlight on that as well. So how
Yes, so
the
there are these many
yeah.
sources of antibiotics that we think that, oh, we are taking antibiotics. It's a minuscule amount and we don't need to worry about it. But they are coming from a lot of other sources. Firstly, people are using them over the counter, or just I see on WhatsApp groups, people are messaging each other that, oh, do you have antibiotics available? Because, I think somebody in the family needs it. So I find it very ridiculous that people are taking medicine in their own hands. If they want to use something, use natural things, not medicines that absolutely should be regulated. So that is one big problem. The second problem, that probably is bigger than this, is the use of antibiotics, heavy doses in animals, in especially in people who are selling meat, poultry, dairy products. So antibiotics are used to increase the weight of these animals so that they put on weight. And how do they put on weight? They don't know the mechanism of this thing. These antibiotics are actually killing the microbiome or destroying the microbiome of these animals. And that's how they are gaining weight, because they are not able to get nutrients from the food that they are eating. So in humans also, who cannot get proper nutrients from their food, they move towards obesity, because it's a very dysbiotic or disturbed microbiome. So that same mechanism is happening in animals. And then this meat, this poultry, milk from these animals, dairy products are sold to customers, and the antibiotics stay on. They are present in the meat products, they are present in the poultry, they are present in the milk and other dairy products. Whatever we are consuming has huge doses of antibiotics, because it's so unregulated. Even in places where it is regulated, it might have trace amounts of antibiotics. It is just so difficult to test for every single meat or poultry or dairy product for the presence of antibiotics. So this is where we are getting our daily dose of antibiotics. What do you think is going to cause? Won't it cause any drug resistance? This is how this multi-drug resistance is coming. And the third very important source is personal hygiene products. Do we correlate a hand wash with an antibiotic? Ever? Do we correlate a toothpaste with an antibiotic? Ever? But any compound that is able to kill bacteria, there are many preservatives also, by the way. when we talk about food having a longer shelf life, if it has preservatives which is allowing it to be on the shelf stable for long periods of time, which means it is not letting microorganisms grow, which means it has something that is going to kill microorganisms. So if we
Yeah,
talk
these
about
are
these
all the
personal hygiene products,
synthetic preservatives. The natural ones
synthetic
are.
preservatives. The natural ones are, of course, not going to do that. But if we talk about these synthetic preservatives, I mean, not all are very harmful, but there are many that are antibacterial, antifungal. And if we talk about the personal hygiene products, especially if we look at the hand soap, it will say that this promises to kill 99.99% of whatever, be it bacteria or all kinds of germs. Or I'm sure many people who are watching this, please check out the hand soap that you are watching, the body wash, the toothpaste, and see if it has antibacterial or antimicrobial on it. Do you really need that? It is also causing a lot of issues with drug resistance. It is also causing a lot of issues with the health of your microbiome, and because of that, on your physical, mental, and emotional health. If you still don't know about the microbiome, do watch our previous videos about that, because that would save a lot of lives. We don't really need antibacterials for taking a shower, for washing our hands. 20 seconds of plain soap is good enough. The soap bubbles are going to remove dirt. When we talk about toothpaste, majority of the toothpastes are advertised as, you can eat whatever you want as long as you brush your teeth, because they have compounds that are going to kill bacteria, like triclosan. These are the compounds that are actually antibacterial. Yes, they do help you prevent infections, but they also kill the oral microbiome. The oral microbiome is actually more diverse than our gut microbiome. It has
Gut
extremely important functions, and we are killing them with either this toothpaste or with mouthwash, which has alcohol. So people think it is a very healthy habit to use a mouthwash to kill germs. So anyway, that's diverting from the topic. But these antibacterial compounds are also antibiotics in some sense. And the
fascinating
other
what
thing
you
is
have
that
told.
the antibiotics that are being prescribed, there is over prescription even from the doctors, just so that they are cautious, so that they cover whatever, even if the infection is viral, or even if it's an allergy, they think that, out of caution, and they prescribe antibiotics. Many people in small towns and villages actually think that if the doctor is not prescribing antibiotics, he or she might not be a good doctor. So there is a kind of a pressure on the doctor also for prescribing these antibiotics. The last thing I want to say is that the antibiotics we use today and the antibiotics that were used a few decades ago are very different. Today's antibiotics are much stronger. They have other additives, like, for example, if we take augmentin as an example, it has amoxicillin. It also has clavulanic acid, which takes the activity of amoxicillin to the next level. It is going to increase it
Booster
multifold.
for the. Yeah,
Yes,
is a
so it's
booster
like a
for.
booster for the activity of the antibiotic. And many children are being prescribed augmentin directly. So
Yes,
just imagine what happens to
and the
their
basic generic
microbiome.
antibiotic would have helped. Very interesting what you have told, Rashmi. And just for the viewers' information, we have seen cases. I mean, there are scientific papers which have shown the gut flora in lab mice which have been in sterilized environment or which have taken antibiotics, how their gut flora is so less diverse than one which is growing in a normal environment. The same goes with microbiome superhero. Currently we are in the process of doing testings as well, and we have wellness program which actually corrects these low diversity microbiome in clients. And we have seen the difference of the gut flora in clients who have not had exposure to diverse kind of food and diverse environments, as compared to those with less exposure where they have less diversity, more exposure to different kinds of food, have more diversity, and they have more immunity. So I won't delve into that more further, but in case you are interested, have a look on our website and you'll find the details there. So,
Yes, so
Rashmi,
you mentioned that. So I wanted to just because you talked about microbiome testing, isn't it interesting that we have seen in the microbiome test reports that people
yes,
who do not take antibiotics don't have any any resistance seen in
yes,
that report to any of the
yes.
antibiotics that are tested. So it's quite interesting what we see, and this is why we really need to be very careful about what we are doing in terms of our choices of antibiotics, especially because just because they are available over the counter and not regulated does not mean we should not take the responsibility of educating ourselves and deciding what is good for us.
Really shocking information there about how antibiotics, though meant to help us out with our with the deadly bacteria, can also be also have this dark side of destroying our gut flora and causing other health issues. Of course, who can I mean, the most talked about topic these days is the multi-drug resistance. That means wow, the medicines that were meant to cure you cannot cure you at all, and that is very disheartening to know. So, Rashmi, what would your suggestion be to restore the destroyed gut flora? I see often that these days some of the doctors who are actually having an awareness about this are suggesting some supplements when you are given a antibiotics. So, what exactly do you think they are doing, and are they trying to help us out, or are these supplements not so much not required for?
Yes, so again, very important thing that you mentioned here. Doctors are becoming aware. I see, especially in clinics outside India, in Doha, many of the clinics actually have when you're waiting for a doctor, when you're waiting in the waiting room, you see this on the screen. So they are actually promoting that antibiotics should be used only when required. We see these kind of messages being scrolled on their TV in these waiting rooms that antibiotics should not be prescribed too many times. If they are not needed, they should not be prescribed. So doctors are becoming more aware. There are things that we can take. So when people start falling sick, there are many natural remedies that they can look for, including the use of natural prebiotics and probiotics is a very good thing that we can do, and anything that can improve immunity is obviously very helpful. So that is going to improve the diversity of the gut microbiome. We have talked about fermented foods before. We have talked about what prebiotics are, and doctors are also prescribing these prebiotics and probiotics along with antibiotics so that it helps restore at least some of it. So that's a very good thing. That is something that people should take if fermented foods are not going to help, because fermented foods also have a limited number of microorganisms. They are beneficial for people who are not on antibiotics, but of course, taking probiotics with this course of antibiotics is quite helpful. But again, I would look at what kind of probiotics they are prescribing, because I've seen this, a particular brand that also has multi-drug resistant bacteria in it. I would stay away from it completely, because it's a good idea to have complete control of your microbiome, and you don't want other companies controlling what you are taking. So read the labels. And probiotics are effective only for a short period of time. They are not going to establish in your gut. You have to change the environment for these probiotics to settle. So natural probiotics are better any day. Fermented foods eaten, consumed every day, a good variety of fermented foods is going to keep antibiotics far far away. You are not going to need that many of them.
A simple addition of homemade yogurt could supplement your course during with an antibiotic, because that is also one of the most commonly found probiotic that you have. But again, it is always best to ask your doctor and check out with them before you go forward. But the only way to do that is to restore your gut flora is eat as diverse colored vegetables and fruits that you can see, seasonal for that matter. Don't go for exotic, we never recommend anything of that sort. And of course, like we said, diverse grains, diverse pulses, anything that
Rainbow diet.
can, yes, rainbow diet, of course. So anything that can add different flavors, colors, feel to your food, go for them. Leave out the processed food. We don't want them anywhere near you or near us, so that, because we know they don't have actually benefit us in any ways. So yes, Rashmi, thank you very much for joining. It was an eye opener for us, this one on the antibiotics, because antibiotics is just given indiscriminately over the counter, sometimes it's over prescribed. And of course, our next series is going to be more interesting, where how the antibiotics can play up with the mother and the child and their journey forward. So keep tuned, stay tuned, have a watch on that, and join us for our next podcast. Thank you so much, Dr. Rashmi.
So, viewers, if you got any new insights about what has been saving your life and how it can be very big trouble for you later on in life, do be very careful the next time you go for an over the counter antibiotic. Or even otherwise, if you're using any meat products, make sure they're clean, make sure they're from good sources. If you learned something new from this, do share this with people who you care for, and do subscribe to our channel, do like this video. See you in the next one.